The Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot. Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot. A cold coming, we heard of it, just the worst of time of the year. For a journey, and at such a long journey, the ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter, and the camel cowed, sore footed, refractory, laying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their new core, the liquor and women. And the night fire going out and the lack of shelter and the city hostile and the towns unfriendly and the village dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with voices singing in our ears, saying that this is all folly. Then at dawn, we came down to the temperate valley, wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation with a running stream and a watermill beating the darkness, and three trees on the low sky, and a old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to the tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, six ants at an open door, dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. But there was no information. And so we continued and traveled and arrived at evening, not at a moment too soon, finding the place. It was you, it was, you may say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again. But set down, this set down, this we led all the way. For bet and debt, there was a bet, certainly. We had evidence, and no doubt I had seen bets and debts, but I thought they were different. This bet was hard, and the bitter agony for us, like death, our deaths. We returned to our places, this kingdom, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation with alien people crouching their gods. I should be glad of another death. About the poet T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was a poet, vast, dramatists, and literary critic who grew up in America and studied at Harvard. So he has a mix of both American and British background, the Sorbonne and Oxford. He settled in England in 1914 and worked initially in teaching and banking. Later, he became a significant feature in publishing company Faber and Faber. His first collection of poems, Portrait and Other Observations, in 1917 was an immediate success and established him as a leading figure in the modern movement, which sought to break with literary tradition in an era of technological advancements and global conflicts. In 1922, Eliot wrote The Wasteland, one of the most influential and important poems of the 20th century. Stylistically complex and innovative, it uses myth and symbolism to express the crisis in post-war modern life and culture. Between the publication of The Wasteland and his death in 1965, Eliot was consistently dominant figure in Western culture. Now let's consider the literary device. First, we see imagery. It's this run almost all through the poem. So descriptive imagery is a descriptive language that appeals to sentences. That appeals to senses, sorry. So Eliot vividly described the harsh condition of the journey during the winter time. The way is deep and the weather sharp. the very dead of winter. You see that visual and tactile imagery with a stunning stream and a water mill beating the darkness evokes visual auditory imagery. So this is a clear image. Allusion. This is an indirect reference to a person, place, and event or text. You would have observed this over time if you've been familiar with poetry. And in the last poem, I also made reference to this. So, referring to biblical events and Christian theology, do you see the three trees on the low sky? This is an allusion to crucifixion, sorry, of Christ. And you know that two people were crucified along with Christ, the two thieves on either side and Christ in the middle. So that's the three trees on the low sky. You would have seen landscape photograph of that. So that is an allusion. Six ants at an open door, dicing for pieces of silver. This refers to Judas' betrayal of Jesus, and collecting some pieces of silver. He eventually died anyway. So symbolism, using objects and characters or events to represent abstract ideas. Now, many images in the poem symbolizes deeper spiritual truths. Three trees on a low sky symbolize cross as Calvary. The old white horse galloped over possibly symbolize the fading of an old era on the coming of judgment. Remember the triumphant entry where Jesus was, on a white on the donkey, something similar to that. Symbolism anyway. And of course the white horse galloped away. That's is making some symbolic reference to the second coming of Christ. And then we have metaphor, which is a direct comparison between two unlike things without the use of like and has. Remember, when you use you use words such as like and as, you are now using simile, which I explained in my previous poetry. So this suggests deeper meaning beyond the literary journey. For example, the bet was add and beta are going for us. So when the bet was add and beta are going for us, like debts are debts. So now we found that simile was used somewhere here, and we've got this like that. That is a simile. Sorry about that. So that is a simile. The use of like here is a simile, and you've got that. Take note of that. So, well, moving on, and the birth of Christ is metaphorically equated with the death of the old order. So at the coming of Christ, the birth was add and beta agonifos like death. So the birth was like death. That is our death, dead to sin, and you come back to alive in Christ when you give your life to Christ. So for personification, you will see giving human qualities to inanimate objects and abstract concepts. So this adds emotional depth to the surrounding. The night fires going out and the lack of shelter implies abandonment and suffering. And then enjambment, the continuation of a sentence beyond the end of the line without a pause. It creates a flow, reflective tone. And in the poem, you'll read the night's fire going out, and the lack of shelter, and the city hostile, and the towns unfriendly, and the village dirty, and charging high prices. This is enjambment. You see a continuous flow of an idea. So that is what the author wanted to achieve in the poetry. So take note of that. And then we've got literary device such as Assonance refers to the repetition of vowel sound within words. Repetition of vowel sound within words. So for example, creates a musical rhythmic quality. It creates musical rhythmic qualities with voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. Now we see repetition of I instead of voices singing in our ears, saying, and this was all folly. Repetition of E sound. So that is assonance for you. So then we've got contrast juxtaposition, like we mentioned. So placing two contrasting ideas against one another. This placing them side by side. I like transformation experience of the Magi. So bet or death, there was a bet. Certainly, we add evidence and no doubts. So this juxtaposes the idea of birth and death to signify spiritual rebirth and the end of the old ways. And then we have irony, which is a situation or a statement that conveys meaning that is opposite to what is expected. So the journey to witness the birth leads to the death of the old order. So we're pouncing, and because the theme of the poem is around that, and the birth was hard and bitter agony for us like death are death. So this irony lies in the fact that witnessing the Christ birth leads to spiritual death of the Magi's old beliefs. You understand? Meaning the birth of Christ, which is a new revelation, a new salvation path, is replacing the old salvation path, which is the law. So that is now the era of the birth of Christ introduces an era of grace, which replaces the old era of obeying the law. So the obeying the law alone will no longer save you. Will save you because you're a slave unto the law. If you understand the biblical context of things. So paradox. Paradox is a statement that appears self-contradictory but reveals deeper truths. The birth of Christ, which should symbolize joy, brings spiritual birth to the Magi. I have seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. So they had thought that it was different, but this is communicating that something is it's actually not different, they are connected in this context. So it's revealing the deeper truths of the connection between birth and death. So this is a point to note. So anaphora is a repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of successive clauses or line. So it emphasizes the difficulty of the journey and the coming out, soul-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow and the night fire going out and the lack of shelter. Repetition of and. You see that conjoin the and just like an enjambment. So it helps you connect and standing it. So it becomes anaphora and not enjambment when you have and at the beginning. Repetition of words and phrases at the beginning of successive clauses. So you see and the camel god. So and then the next one starts here. You see and there starting a particular talk, and you find another and there starting another talk. So it could be another word, but the thing, the repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of successive clause to create an effect. And then let's talk about the tone. In another tone, the attitude of tone refers to attitude or emotional quality conveyed by the author. Emotional quality. Take note of that. Emotional quality conveyed by the shift from hardship to struggle to reflection and disillusionment. So the beginning is harsh and weary. The cold winter we had of it. That is a tone. So it's like a way of showing expressing regret. So we've got the ending is reflective and resigned. I should be glad of another death. So now they've seen the value in the death that they experience, although it comes with some difficulty, but they eventually found the value. So now that's why they also said I should be glad of another death. Biblical allegory. This is another literary device. Then an allegory, you know what it is, but now this is not in a biblical context. So biblical allegory is a narrative that uses symbolism to convey Christian theological theme. So the entire poem is an allegory of spiritual transformation and the challenges of embracing a new faith and the new faith which is introduced by Christ. The Magi's journey symbolizes the search for a spiritual truth and the death of the old ways. You understand that? So it is an allegory is when you symbolically refer to something, but now we're talking about biblical allegory, meaning that you can find the context and the meaning in the Bible. And then we'll move on to oxymoron. Oxymoron is a figure of speech that combines contradictory terms. So don't mix it with enjambments. Don't mix this with juxtaposition. Don't mix this with irony. So oxymoron highlights the tension between opposing ideas. So hard and bitter agony for us, like death are death. So now it combines agony associated with birth and death. So get that right and don't mix that. If you have further questions on that, please ask me in the comments section. So we have the Coursera, a deliberate pause or break within the line of poetry. So now it creates a reflective, contemplative mood. In the Bible, you see something like Selah, it means a pause. So this sets down this where we led all the way for bet or that. So you see that now this is like a pause in between. And then we've got hyperbole. Hyperbole is an exaggeration for emphasis or effect. And emphasize difficulty of the journey, and that was used to emphasize the difficulty of the journey, just the worst of time of the year for a journey and such a long journey. The worst of time of the year for a journey and such a long journey. So hyperbole, that not very exaggerated, but then you can find some elements of that. The worst of the year. So that absolutely may not be the worst of the year, but it's an hyperbole exaggeration to express their difficulty. So and then we've got ambiguity, the use of language that allows multiple interpretation, leaves the final meaning of the journey open to interpretation. Bet or death is a bet or death suggests an uncertainty about whether the journey was a beginning or an end. So is it the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning? So ambiguity leaves us the reader to make sense of it all. And then we've got another literary divisor, which is epiphany. Epiphany is a sudden moment of realization or insight. So the Magi experience a spiritual awakening that transforms their perspective. So we return to our places, this kingdom, but no longer at his here. So now this is a strong one that creates a sense of realization and a new insight, different from what they've been experiencing. So this is epiphany. And then we have metonym, metonym or something. Metonym. I call it metonym. So well, a figure of speech where an attribute or related terms is used to represent something. So for example, we have a piece of silver. This is refers to the bribe that Judas Iscariot collected from the enemy who took Jesus away. Well, this is metonym. It is used to suggest a larger idea through specific reference. So this was referring to Judas, refers to betrayal and corruption. And then we'll look at the poem again. A code coming, we're out of it in just the worst time of the year. For a journey and such a long journey, the way is deep and the weather sharp. The way is deep and the weather sharp. The very dead of winter and the coming cloud, soft-footed refractory. Take note of that. And the camel god, soft-footed refractory, laying down in the melting snow. And there were times we regretted the summer palaces on the slope and the terraces, and the silken girls bring the sherbets. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling. You see how difficult it was for them then, and the running away, wanting their lincoln women and their knights. The night fire going out and the lack of shelter, and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly, and villagers dirty and charging high prices. At time we heard of it. You see that the use of and to start statement, it gives some sort of repetition and makes you feel the emphasis. And then we've got a hard time we had of it. At the end, we fed to travel all night, sleeping in snatches with voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. You see that? And now, then at the dawn, we came down to the temperate valley, wet below the snow line. You know what snow line is? That's an imagery. Smelling of vegetation with a running stream and a water mule beating the darkness, and three trees on the low sky. Now we see the movement towards a valley descending from a mountain, and they can see a picture of a landscape, and then they can see the tree crosses, which is depicted with what? The three trees on the low sky. And the old white horses galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to the tavern in a white with the vine leaves over the lintel. 6 hands at an open door, dicing for a piece of silver. Now, somebody who is betraying. And the feet kicking the empty wineskin. But there was no information, and so we continued and arrived at evening. Not a moment too soon. Yes, it wasn't too fast. It took some time. And then finding the place, it was, you may say, satisfactory. They enjoying the journey. It was an experience that they enjoyed. And all this was a long time ago. All this was a long time ago. I remember and I will do it again. But set down, this where we led all the way for. Bet or death. There was a bet, certainly. And we had evidence, no doubt. No doubt. I had seen bet and death. But I thought they were different. But this bet was hard and bitter agony for us. Like death are death. We return to our places, this kingdom, but no longer as easier. In the old dispensation, remember after Jesus' death on the cross, there was turbulence, there was night in day changing to night, it was cloudy, the veil was torn and all. So that's where we say this kingdom, but no longer as easier. In the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods, I should be glad of another death. So it was a great experience for the Magi. So I hope you have enjoyed this. Looking if you have not liked, share, and subscribe, please do that and subscribe to this channel. God bless you, and see you in the next analysis.